Power exists where awareness begins, because without awareness, people live in a fog, navigating a world shaped by rules they didn't create and dynamics they don't fully understand. Knowledge is not merely information. It is the foundation of perception, the lens through which everything is filtered. When someone doesn't know the underlying patterns of how things work, whether in relationships, organizations, or society, they unknowingly surrender their power to those who do. Ignorance doesn't just limit opportunity, it quietly chains a person to a system that benefits someone else. The moment awareness arrives, however, the rules of the game change. What once felt confusing suddenly becomes clear, and the hidden strings of influence become visible, making it possible to cut them or use them with intention. Think of how most people interact in any group setting. There are unwritten codes, hierarchies, and rituals that dictate behavior, but not everyone is conscious of them. Some play along without questioning, while others recognize the subtleties, the unspoken rules of who speaks first, who people defer to, whose opinion carries weight, and whose doesn't. The one who sees these patterns isn't smarter or luckier, but more aware. That awareness alone gives them a strategic edge because they are no longer reacting blindly, they are responding with intention. Once the hidden structure is understood, the ability to influence outcomes multiplies. In relationships, the same truth applies. People often play roles that have been handed to them without realizing it. Expectations, assumptions, and cultural conditioning shape how they interact. As long as someone accepts these roles without question, they operate within a framework designed by someone else. Awareness disrupts that framework. When a person recognizes the psychology behind attention, affection, or validation, they begin to see that much of what they thought was personal is actually patterned. Once they see the pattern, they are no longer caught in it. They can step outside, observe, and decide whether to continue shift or reject it entirely. History is filled with examples of awareness dismantling hidden power. Revolutions don't begin because people suddenly gain resources. They begin because people suddenly gain awareness. They realize the imbalance wasn't natural but manufactured, not permanent but sustained by ignorance. Once awareness spreads, the very foundation of control collapses because power built on secrecy cannot survive exposure. The same principle applies to the micro-dynamics of everyday life. A leader in a workplace who recognizes the unspoken fears driving employee behavior can lead differently, not through force, but through empathy and strategic guidance. An individual who understands the subtle cues in negotiation gains influence because they see the levers others don't even know exist. The illusion of power always relies on the blindness of the other side. When someone appears larger than life, intimidating, or indispensable, it's usually because the observer doesn't yet see their vulnerabilities, their dependencies, or the structures holding them up. Once those structures are visible, the illusion breaks. Awareness shrinks giants into ordinary figures and reveals that the rules were never as rigid as they seemed. Awareness liberates because it offers choice where there once was only submission. It is important to understand that awareness doesn't always mean control, but it does mean freedom. Control implies domination over others, while freedom is the capacity to navigate on one's own terms. When people know the underlying dynamics, they stop reacting to manipulation, flattery, or fear. They begin to choose with clarity, recognizing both the cost and benefit of every decision. Even if they stay within the same system, their relationship with it changes because they are no longer playing by hidden rules. Awareness also demands responsibility. To see what others don't is not just an advantage, it is a weight. One cannot unsee once they see. The clarity that comes with awareness creates accountability. If you know the game, you can't pretend ignorance. If you see the pattern, you must decide whether to use it for self-interest, for shared growth, or for liberation. That choice becomes the measure of one's character, because power without awareness corrupts, but awareness without integrity destroys. Power begins where awareness begins, because awareness reveals that the rules are not fixed, the structures are not eternal, and the dynamics are not inevitable. Once people see the patterns, they stop playing by someone else's design, and in that moment, the landscape of possibility opens in ways that were previously invisible. Influence is not about words, but leverage, because words without leverage are just noise. People often assume that influence comes from the most persuasive speaker, the loudest voice, or the most eloquent argument, but history and experience show otherwise. Influence comes from an understanding of what truly matters to the other side and how that need can be shaped, fulfilled, or withheld. Those who seem to hold control rarely do so because they are inherently stronger, smarter, or more capable. They hold it because the other side has not yet realized the leverage they already possess. Control is not a reflection of dominance, but of perception, and perception changes the moment awareness of leverage arises. Consider negotiations as an example. The person who seems to hold power often walks into the room with confidence, but confidence is only sustainable as long as the other side fails to see what they bring to the table. The instant someone recognizes that the negotiation cannot succeed without their input, resources, or approval, the balance shifts. Influence no longer comes from what is said, but from the quiet knowledge of what cannot move forward without them. This recognition changes posture, tone, and decision-making. Words become secondary because the leverage speaks louder than any argument could. Leverage is everywhere, though it often hides beneath assumptions. In relationships, one person may feel dependent on the other for validation, security, or acceptance. As long as they don't recognize their own worth, the other appears to hold control. Yet, the moment they see that they bring uniqueness, energy, or opportunity that cannot be replaced, the balance of power shifts. It is not arrogance, it is clarity. Influence emerges not from demanding attention or pleading for fairness, but from embodying the awareness that what they offer cannot be dismissed without consequence. Leverage, when understood, transforms silence into strength. Organizations operate under the same principle. Employees often underestimate their influence because they believe their contributions are small in comparison to the company. Yet entire industries have shifted when workers realize their collective leverage. Strikes, walkouts, or even a single resignation from a key individual demonstrate that the engine of a system cannot run without its critical parts. Leaders who fail to recognize this often rely on words, policies, promises, or threats to maintain control. But the ones who understand leverage know that real influence is sustained not through words, but through balance, respect, and recognition of mutual dependency. Leverage also works subtly in human psychology. When someone wants something deeply, the one who can provide or withhold it holds influence whether they speak or remain silent. Silence, in fact, often holds more weight than speeches. People lean in to fill gaps when they sense something vital is at stake. Influence is not about saying the right thing, but about knowing that the other person cannot achieve their outcome without you. Awareness of this fact is what shifts the dynamic forever. The danger lies in ignorance of leverage. Without awareness, people overcompensate with words, explanations, and arguments, believing that persuasion alone will change outcomes. Yet persuasion without leverage is exhausting and often fruitless. Conversely, those who quietly recognize leverage rarely need to argue at all. Their presence becomes influence because their value is undeniable once it is recognized. The moment recognition happens, everything changes permanently. Once someone realizes their role, their contribution or their worth is non-negotiable, they no longer shrink towards approval or intimidation. They see the exchange as it is a balance of needs, each side bringing something the other cannot create alone. Influence emerges naturally when this balance is seen clearly, because the one who recognizes leverage no longer seeks control, they embody it. And in that embodiment, the illusion of one-sided power disappears, replaced by a new reality where both sides must negotiate, not dominate. Dependence thrives on assumptions because assumptions create invisible walls that people rarely stop to examine. When left unchallenged, these assumptions become the foundation of dependency, shaping behavior, decisions, and even self-worth. People assume they cannot succeed without someone else's approval, that they need a certain circumstance to feel whole, or that the existing structure around them is fixed and unchangeable. These assumptions may not be true, yet, as long as they go unquestioned, they carry the weight of truth. Dependence grows in silence, nurtured not by reality, but by beliefs that no one has paused to test. Think about the dynamics in everyday relationships. Many operate under unspoken assumptions. One person assumes the other will always take care of finances, that affection will always be offered unconditionally, or that compromise will always flow one way. These assumptions may not have been explicitly stated, yet they become the fabric of the connection. The one who accepts them without question falls into dependence, not because they lack strength, but because they fail to realize the foundation is negotiable. The moment they stop and ask, why do I assume it has to be this way? The cracks in that foundation appear. Questioning reveals possibility, and possibility weakens the chains of dependence. In organizations, the same principle applies. Employees assume their job security relies solely on the goodwill of management, or that advancement is impossible without playing by certain unwritten rules. Leaders assume loyalty is guaranteed, or that silence equals agreement. Dependence forms on both sides because no one challenges these assumptions openly. But when assumptions are questioned, new realities unfold. Workers realize they have skills transferable beyond one organization. Leaders realize that loyalty is not guaranteed but earned daily. The recognition of these truths does not necessarily destroy the relationship, but it transforms it from dependency into choice. Choice is where freedom begins. Assumptions are comfortable because they allow people to avoid confrontation with reality. To assume is to simplify, to reduce complexity into predictable patterns. Yet those patterns can become prisons. A person who assumes they cannot live without someone else never tests the depth of their own resilience. A leader who assumes their influence is permanent never prepares for change. A culture that assumes its traditions cannot evolve traps itself in stagnation. Dependence thrives here because assumptions discourage exploration. They whisper, this is just how things are, and in believing that whisper, people surrender their freedom. The act of questioning assumptions is powerful because it introduces possibility. It does not mean abandoning everything or rejecting all beliefs, but it means refusing to accept them blindly. When someone questions whether they truly need external validation to feel valuable, they begin to see their worth as independent. When a group questions whether authority has to be obeyed without accountability, they open the door to fairness and reform. When a person questions whether they must continue in a role that drains them, they discover the possibility of reinvention. Freedom begins not in action, but in the spark of inquiry. Dependence is subtle, often disguised as loyalty, love, or stability. But true loyalty is a choice, not an assumption. True love thrives in freedom, not in chains of unspoken expectations. True stability comes from adaptability, not from clinging to outdated beliefs. By questioning assumptions, people do not weaken their bonds. They strengthen them because the bond that survives questioning is authentic, not dependent on illusions. Freedom is not the absence of connection, but the presence of clarity. When assumptions are challenged, people stand not in dependence, but in awareness. They recognize that the dynamics they once took for granted are not permanent, and that realization allows them to engage from a place of strength, not need. Dependence shrinks in the light of inquiry because once assumptions are revealed as choices, freedom becomes not a distant dream, but a present reality. Value is negotiated, not granted, because no one truly possesses authority over another without mutual recognition of worth. Power that appears permanent is often sustained not by force alone, but by silent agreement. When people accept another's judgment of their value without questioning, they hand over influence. When they awaken to their own worth, the negotiation shifts and the balance of the relationship transforms. Value is never fixed. It is constantly defined by perception, awareness, and willingness to walk away from terms that no longer serve. In relationships, this truth is evident. One person may act as though they are indispensable, as though their presence alone is a gift that must be treasured without question. That illusion only works as long as the other accepts it. Once awareness dawns, once the other recognizes that they, too, bring something irreplaceable, the conversation changes. No longer is one side the giver of value and the other the receiver. Both are contributors in a dynamic exchange. The moment one side realizes this, dependency dissolves and negotiation begins. Love, respect, and loyalty become conscious choices rather than concessions granted by one and begged for by the other. The workplace offers the same pattern. An employer might project dominance, suggesting that employees are lucky to have a job at all. That statement only holds weight until employees recognize their skills, talents, and creativity as valuable resources the organization cannot thrive without. Once that awareness spreads, collective bargaining, entrepreneurship, or even individual mobility becomes possible. The employer no longer dictates terms from above. Instead, a negotiation takes place where value is exchanged rather than granted. The illusion of one-sided power evaporates, and the conversation moves to balance fairness and sustainability. History echoes this principle repeatedly. Oppressive systems appear stable until those oppressed recognize their collective worth. Revolutions are not born merely out of frustration, but out of the awakening to value, an awakening that declares, we are not lesser, our contribution is not optional. Once this realization settles, the terms of society itself are renegotiated. No empire, however powerful, has survived indefinitely on the assumption of unchallenged authority. The recognition of worth always reshapes the balance of power, no matter how immovable the structure once seemed. Value is also deeply personal. Many people live lives dictated by external validation, seeking approval from family, peers, or society to feel worthy. They accept judgments as though worth is something to be handed out by others. In reality, no one can grant value. They can only recognize what already exists. When an individual understands their worth, not in arrogance but in clarity, their relationships, decisions, and opportunities transform. They stop waiting for permission and begin setting terms. The negotiation becomes internal first, then external as they align their life with the recognition of what they truly deserve. The power of negotiation lies in awareness of alternatives. Value feels granted when someone believes there is no other option, no replacement, no path beyond what currently exists. But when choices appear, the dependency breaks. A partner who knows they bring loyalty and presence does not beg for affection. They negotiate mutual respect. A professional who understands their expertise does not accept exploitation. They negotiate fair compensation. A community that knows its unity does not tolerate oppression. It negotiates for dignity. The shift is not in volume or force, but in awareness that changes the terms entirely. No one holds permanent power unless the other agrees to it. Agreements may be silent, unconscious, or conditioned, but they are agreements nonetheless. The moment someone withdraws consent by recognizing their own worth, the structure of control weakens. Relationships recalibrate, organizations adapt, societies evolve. Value has never been a gift handed down. It has always been a negotiation shaped by perception recognition and the willingness to redefine terms. Once awareness of worth arises, the negotiation is no longer about survival, but about alignment, and in that alignment, true freedom begins. Mystery loses power in the light of clarity because the unknown is what gives rise to fear, control, and fascination. What people do not fully understand often appears larger, stronger, and more dangerous than it really is. This is why manipulation thrives in secrecy. The less someone knows, the easier it is to control their imagination. In the absence of clarity, the mind fills the gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions often exaggerate the strength of what is hidden. But the moment light is cast, the fog lifts, and what once felt untouchable becomes ordinary, sometimes even fragile. Transparency does not just reveal truth, it dismantles illusions, ending the hold that mystery once had. Consider the way authority functions. Leaders, institutions, or even individuals maintain power through mystique, through the idea that they possess knowledge, abilities, or access beyond the reach of others. As long as others believe in this separation, they comply without resistance. Yet when transparency reveals that authority is built not on magic but on systems, habits, or cooperation, the sense of intimidation dissolves. Suddenly, the person who once seemed invincible is just another human being with flaws, limitations, and dependencies. The aura of power is not inherent, it is manufactured by mystery. When clarity arrives, so does equality. In relationships, mystery is often mistaken for strength. One person may keep their intentions vague, their emotions hidden, or their behavior unpredictable, creating a sense of dependency in the other. This uncertainty makes the other feel small, constantly guessing, constantly adjusting, afraid to disturb the unknown. But when clarity replaces this fog, when words, actions, and intentions align, the power dynamic changes. Manipulation becomes impossible because the space for projection disappears. People cannot be held hostage by what they can see plainly. Transparency restores balance, allowing trust to grow where confusion once lived. Fear itself operates in the same way. What people fear most is rarely the thing itself, but the mystery around it. A shadow in the dark seems terrifying until light reveals it to be a tree branch. Anxiety about the future spirals not because the future is unbearable, but because it is uncertain. Clarity breaks the spell. Naming the problem, understanding the risk, or mapping the next step transforms fear into something manageable. The unknown magnifies danger, the known shrinks it. Transparency is not the removal of challenge, but the removal of distortion. History offers countless examples where mystery sustained control. Secret rituals, coded languages, and hidden rules gave power to a few at the expense of the many. Knowledge was guarded, not shared, because mystery is a tool of domination. Yet every breakthrough in human progress has come from clarity, education spread, discoveries revealed, voices made public. Once hidden knowledge became accessible, manipulation collapsed. Society shifted because mystery could no longer sustain illusions of superiority. The light of clarity always pushes back against systems built on secrecy. On a personal level, mystery often surrounds identity and worth. People feel intimidated by the opinions of others because they assume those judgments carry objective truth. But when clarity arrives, when someone realizes that opinions are reflections, not facts, the grip of intimidation weakens. What once felt untouchable, like the approval of others, is seen for what it is: subjective, fleeting, and often irrelevant. Transparency with oneself is the most liberating clarity of all, because self-awareness dismantles the manipulations of comparison and expectation. The power of mystery lies in shadows, but shadows cannot survive direct light. Manipulation thrives when questions go unasked, when silence maintains the illusion, when assumptions replace facts. Clarity disrupts this cycle by demanding honesty, by exposing the mechanisms behind the curtain, by showing that what seemed like magic was only strategy. Once revealed, the intimidation fades, and what once had control loses its grip forever. Transparency is not only a tool for truth, it is the end of manipulation, the beginning of choice, and the restoration of balance. Choice is the ultimate equalizer because it shifts power from external control to internal recognition. As long as people believe they have no choice, they remain trapped in dependency, living under terms set by others. But the moment they realize that even in the most difficult circumstances, they still retain the ability to choose, whether to stay, to walk away, or to redefine the terms, the illusion of control held by others collapses. What once looked like dominance is revealed to be reliance on unawareness, because control only thrives when people forget their agency. In every relationship, whether personal or professional, choice is the hidden force. A partner may appear to hold complete sway over the dynamic, dictating expectations and setting the tone, but their influence exists only because the other has not acknowledged the possibility of choice. The day awareness comes, the dynamic changes permanently. Choosing to stay no longer looks like weakness, but becomes a deliberate act. Choosing to leave is no longer rebellion, but reclamation. Choosing to redefine the terms introduces balance, proving that no one can truly own another when choice remains alive. Awareness of choice turns what was once dependency into empowerment. Organizations mirror this truth. Employees often feel trapped, convinced they must endure poor conditions because alternatives seem scarce. Yet the awareness of transferable skills of collective strength, or of the courage to walk away, shifts the balance. Companies do not function without the people who sustain them, and when employees embrace choice, they reclaim negotiating power. Leaders who understand this foster transparency and respect, knowing control built on the denial of choice will never last. True leadership thrives not by removing choice, but by creating environments where the choice to stay is rooted in purpose, not fear. History is written by the power of choice. Entire movements began when people realized they were not bound to obedience, that the structures of authority depended on their compliance. Oppression always teaches the illusion of no choice, conditioning people to believe they must accept what is handed to them. But revolutions ignite when awareness shatters this illusion. People realize they can walk away from systems, refuse participation, or redefine the rules altogether. Once this recognition spreads, the hold of rulers, institutions, or ideologies weakens, not because they lost resources, but because people reclaim choice. On a personal level, choice is deeply liberating because it reframes every experience. Fear grows when people believe they are cornered with no way forward. But when choice enters the picture, even hardship becomes bearable. Knowing that one can choose to endure, to change course, or to walk away restores dignity. It does not erase difficulty, but it replaces helplessness with agency. A person who recognizes they have a choice no longer operates from desperation but from clarity, even in the face of struggle. That clarity transforms the quality of decision, making and dismantles the control of those who once thrived on dependency. Choice also strips away manipulation. Manipulation relies on convincing someone they have no other option, that resistance or departure would cost too much. Once awareness reveals the spectrum of choices, manipulation loses its grip. Silence becomes a choice. Engagement becomes a choice. Even forgiveness becomes a choice. With each realization, the one who once felt powerless begins to shape the dynamic actively rather than passively receiving whatever is dictated. The control that seemed absolute crumbles because its foundation was never strength but unawareness. The truth is that choice is always present, even when hidden under fear, habit, or conditioning. People may not control every circumstance, but they always control response. The equalizing power of choice lies not in changing the world instantly, but in reclaiming agency. With agency, the world looks different. What once seemed like imprisonment is reframed as opportunity for decision. What once felt like weakness transforms into strength of discernment. And once people recognize this truth, no one can truly dominate them, because choice will always remain the ultimate equalizer.